He was sitting upright, back against the seawall, arms resting at his sides, legs stretched forward, ankles crossed, as if he had simply paused to watch the sun go down over the Southern Ocean and never quite got up again. It was the first day of December, 1948. Somerton Beach, South Australia, a stretch of sand south of Adelaide where families spread their towels and children chased the foam. A place ordinary enough to make what happened there feel almost impossible. A man was dead, and no one, not a single person anywhere in the world, seemed to know who he was. His face was handsome by most accounts, well built, somewhere between 40 and 45 years old, though that estimate would shift as the years went on. His clothes were pressed and tidy, a white shirt, a red and blue tie knotted neatly at the throat, brown trousers, polished shoes. He wore no hat, unusual for the time and the heat. He carried no wallet, no identification of any kind. Every label had been carefully removed from every piece of clothing he wore. Witnesses would later come forward to say they had seen him there the previous evening, lying in that same position on the beach, motionless, one arm extended. A couple had watched him for a while, wondering if he was drunk. He had not moved. They assumed he had fallen asleep. By morning, he was still there, still in the same position, and he was dead. The police were called. The body was taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and the search for the man's identity began. It would not end for decades. The initial post-mortem revealed a body in extraordinary physical condition. The man was muscular, broad-shouldered, with well-developed calves consistent with someone who danced or ran, or perhaps climbed. His hands, however, told a different story. They were soft, uncalloused, inconsistent with a life of heavy manual labor. His shoes showed very little wear on their soles, despite being well-made and well-fitted. Whoever this man was, he had not spent his life doing rough work with his hands, and he had not walked long distances in those shoes. The toxicology results were inconclusive, and that word would haunt this case for generations. There were signs of blood congestion in the brain and organs. The heart showed acute dilation. The spleen was enlarged, 3 times its normal size, a detail that struck pathologists as deeply abnormal. But there was no identifiable poison in the body, no obvious cause of death, no external injuries, no signs of a struggle. The pathologist's report suggested the man had died sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning on the 1st of December, but witnesses had seen him alive and still on the beach the evening before, on the 30th of November. The question of when exactly he had died and what had killed him would remain officially unresolved. Death by unknown causes. Body of an unknown man. The police circulated photographs. They checked missing persons reports across Australia. They sent inquiries to international agencies. They asked dentists to examine the teeth, hoping for a match with dental records. The teeth themselves were unusual, a feature of the upper jaw that pathologists noted was rare and potentially useful for identification. But no one came forward. No family, no employer, no friend. No one in the world claimed this man. The investigation should have ended there, with a sad but ultimately mundane entry in the register of unclaimed dead. Instead, investigators discovered something that would change everything. Inside his trouser pocket was an unused second-class train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach. In his jacket was a bus ticket, an American brand comb, a pack of chewing gum, a box of matches, and a packet of cigarettes, Army Club brand, though the cigarettes inside were a different, more expensive brand, Kensitas. There was also a small aluminum can of polish and a pair of scissors. Nothing unusual in isolation. But there was no suitcase, No luggage of any kind found near the body. It would take weeks before investigators discovered that a brown suitcase had been checked into the cloakroom at Adelaide railway station on the morning of November 30th, the day before the body was found. The suitcase was eventually linked to the dead man, but it yielded no answers. More clothing, all labels removed. A reel of orange thread, an unusual type rarely sold in Australia. A knife, a stenciling brush of the kind used to mark cargo, a laundry bag with the name Keane written on it, and several items marked with variations of the same name. But no one named Keane was ever identified as a match. Investigators suspected the name was either a red herring, borrowed from another source, or simply misread. Every label removed, every identifier stripped away. This was not carelessness or coincidence. Someone had made a deliberate effort to make this man untraceable. But why? For months, the case was a frustrating dead end. The body had been embalmed and a plaster cast made of the man's face and torso, a decision that would later prove prescient, but still no one came forward. Newspapers ran photographs. The story circulated through Australia and beyond, and still, nothing. Then, in July of 1949, 7 months after the body was found, detectives made a discovery that would transform this already baffling case into something far stranger. During a second examination of the man's clothing, a detective noticed a tiny rolled piece of paper hidden inside a previously overlooked fob pocket sewn into the waistband of the trousers. A secret pocket. It was so small and so well concealed that investigators had missed it entirely in the initial search. The slip of paper was removed and unrolled. On it were 2 words, printed in an unusual typeface, torn from a book. Tamam Shud, Persian, from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century collection of poetry translated into English by Edward Fitzgerald in 1859, which had become one of the most beloved literary works of the Victorian era and beyond. The phrase appears at the very end of the poem collection, beneath the final verse, and it means, "It is finished. It is ended." 2 words from the last page of a book of poetry about fate, time, pleasure, and the acceptance of death, hidden in a secret pocket of a dead man with no name. The case had just become something else entirely. Police immediately began searching for the specific copy of the Rubaiyat from which the slip had been torn. It was an unusual edition. They identified the typeface and format as belonging to a rare New Zealand printing, a version that was not widely distributed. And then, in a development so improbable that it reads like fiction but is documented fact, someone came forward. A man living in Glenelg, a suburb just south of Somerton Beach, reported that shortly before the body was found, he had noticed a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam lying in the back seat of his unlocked car, which had been parked outside his house. He had not known where it came from. He had set it aside and nearly forgotten it. But after seeing news coverage of the Tamam Shud discovery, he came forward with the book. The torn edge of the slip matched the final page of the book. It was the same copy, but the book had more to offer than a torn page. Penciled in the back cover, in faint handwriting, was a local telephone number, and beside it, in the same pencil, was a series of capital letters arranged in 5 irregular lines, letters that formed no obvious word in any known language. The code. Investigators handed the transcription to military cryptographers. The original book was examined by experts at the University of Adelaide. The code was shared with intelligence agencies. It was studied for decades by amateur and professional codebreakers alike. Entire careers and obsessive private investigations have been poured into those 5 lines of letters. To this day, no one has definitively cracked them. The telephone number, however, led somewhere. It belonged to a young nurse living in Glenelg, not far from where the car with the book had been parked, not far from Somerton Beach itself. Police interviewed her. Her name, at her request, was suppressed for decades. She was identified publicly only as Jeston, a name taken from an inscription found inside the book. In 2002, after years of rumor, her name was identified in the press as Jo Thompson. She died in 2007. In her interview with police in 1949, she admitted that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, the same rare New Zealand edition, and that she had given it to a man. She denied knowing the dead man on Somerton Beach. She denied any connection to the case. But detectives noted that when they showed her the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face, not a photograph but the three-dimensional reconstruction, she appeared visibly distressed. Officers described her reaction as one of shock, or of recognition suppressed. She would never publicly explain that reaction. Years later, investigators would learn that she had a son, a boy born in 1947, roughly a year before the death on the beach. The boy's father was never publicly identified. When the son, Robin Thompson, known as Robin, grew up, those who encountered both the case and the man were struck by a physical resemblance. The same unusual ear structure, the same rare dental anomaly that the Somerton man had possessed. The ear feature, a specific shape of the helix and lobule, is genetically distinctive. Some researchers believe the evidence, while circumstantial, suggests Robin was the Somerton man's child. Robin Thompson died in 2009, having reportedly expressed distress about the case in his later years. Whatever he knew, if he knew anything, went with him. As the decades passed, the case attracted a growing community of researchers, investigators, and theorists, and the leading theory, advanced carefully, with appropriate qualifications, centered on espionage. The evidence, taken together, suggested a picture: a man of unknown nationality, in excellent physical condition, carrying no identification, with labels deliberately removed from clothing, in possession of a coded message and a book linked to a woman who appeared to recognize him but denied it, found dead of no apparent cause in a coastal city that, at the time, was home to the Woomera rocket testing range and the early infrastructure of Australia's Cold War defence establishment. The Rubaiyat itself had a documented history of use as a cipher key, a one-time pad system in which a specific edition of a book serves as the encryption key for messages, with a sender and receiver both holding identical copies. The rarity of the New Zealand edition would make it ideal for such a purpose. If the letters in the back of the book were a coded message, and the Rubaiyat itself was the key, then whoever received it would need their own matching copy to decode it. Intelligence agencies in Australia and abroad took the case seriously enough that files on it remained classified for years. The British Home Office, ASIO, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, and other agencies held records related to the investigation. Whether those records contain answers that remain hidden, or simply the record of investigations that went nowhere, is not known. Many files were eventually released, but researchers have noted apparent gaps. The poisoning theory aligns with the espionage hypothesis. Certain poisons used in Cold War intelligence operations were designed to leave minimal traces, causing organ distress and cardiac failure, and to metabolize quickly in the body. A skilled agent carrying such a substance could be killed or could self-administer a lethal dose, leaving a body that would resist easy toxicological detection in 1948. But these are theories. The word bears repeating. Intelligent, well-researched, evidence-supported theories. But theories. No intelligence document has ever been produced that names this man. No agency has ever officially confirmed a connection. The espionage hypothesis fits much of the evidence, but fitting the evidence is not the same as explaining it. 70 years after the body was found on Somerton Beach, the case entered a new phase. In 2019, South Australian authorities, following years of advocacy by researchers, most notably Derek Abbott, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide who had spent over a decade investigating the case, agreed to exhume the Somerton man's remains. The body had been buried in West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide in 1949. The grave had been maintained by the public, by researchers, by the simply curious. Flowers were left there regularly. Notes. The anonymous dead attract a particular kind of human tenderness. The exhumation proceeded in May 2019. DNA samples were extracted from the remains, hair, teeth, bone, and subjected to modern genomic analysis unavailable to investigators in 1948, 1958, or even 1998. In 2022, results from this analysis were reported in the press. Researchers working with the extracted DNA, particularly a team led by Colleen Fitzpatrick and involving genetic genealogy, made significant progress. The DNA profile suggested the man had a haplogroup consistent with origins in either Britain or Western Europe. More specifically, the genetic data suggested possible Irish or Scottish ancestry. Fitzpatrick's team identified potential genealogical connections through mitochondrial and Y chromosome analysis. A name emerged: Carl Charles Webb, a man born in Melbourne in 1905, an instrument maker and electrical engineer, who had a troubled personal history and had been reported missing by estranged family members. The theory was that this was the Somerton man. It must be stated clearly, as of the time of this account, this identification has not been officially confirmed. It has been reported in Australian press as a strong possibility, a credible hypothesis generated by serious forensic work, but authorities had not formally closed the case. Other researchers have raised questions about the methodology and the certainty with which some claims were made. The family of Charles Webb, if he has any traceable descendants, had not publicly confirmed the identification at the time of reporting. The mystery has not ended. It has only changed shape. What we are left with is a set of facts that resist comfortable explanation. A man died on a busy beach in the middle of summer. He was found not in an alley, not in a warehouse, not in some remote location where obscurity might be expected. He was found in public. People had seen him lying there for hours. Children had played nearby. Couples had walked past. The sun had set and risen again, and no one knew who he was. In the years since, researchers have tried to answer not just the factual questions, but the deeper, more unsettling one. What kind of life produces a death like this? What circumstances lead a man to strip every label from every piece of clothing he owns and then die, quietly and alone, watching the Southern Ocean? Was he a spy, carrying secrets too dangerous to be discovered? Was he a man fleeing something, a past, a family, an identity he had outgrown or needed to abandon? Was he a man who had chosen to disappear and had succeeded at it more completely than he intended? Was he a victim of someone else's choice, poisoned, discarded, staged on a beach to look like a peaceful death? Or is the simplest, strangest possibility closest to the truth, that he was a private man, unknown to the systems that track and file and record human beings, who simply died, and whose death fell into a gap in the world's knowledge, a gap that no amount of investigation has entirely filled? The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is a meditation on impermanence, on the brevity of life, on the impossibility of knowing what lies beyond it. Fitzgerald's translation, the version from which the slip of paper was torn, contains verses that feel almost unbearably apt. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. Whoever chose those words, whoever carried a torn fragment of that final page in a secret pocket, or placed it there, or died with it against his skin, whether by intention or by fate, chose an epitaph of startling precision. It is finished. It is ended. Except that it isn't. Because somewhere on the coast of South Australia, in a cemetery where strangers still leave flowers on a grave without a real name, the question remains open. Not as an abstraction, not as a puzzle for enthusiasts, but as the trace of an actual human being who walked through the world, whose heart beat, whose hands moved, who looked out at that same ocean, and who left behind, in the end, only questions. The Somerton Man has been given many names by researchers and press over the decades. He has been theorized into and out of a dozen identities. He has been a spy, a victim, a father, a ghost. He has been the subject of university research, government inquiries, and thousands of hours of investigation by people who never met him and cannot say why they cannot stop looking. That may be the most human thing about this case. Not the code, not the poison, not the secret pocket or the torn page or the woman in Glenelg who looked at a plaster cast and gave nothing away. It is the fact that we cannot bear to leave him unnamed. He was real. He was there. He sat on that beach in the last hours of November and watched the sun go down over the Southern Ocean, and somewhere inside whatever he was carrying, grief, fear, purpose, exhaustion, he breathed his last breath in the ordinary air of an ordinary Australian summer evening. And then the world tried to find him, and couldn't, and is still trying. Tamam Shud.